Beneath the weary white lights of Seattle International Airport, Gate G lingered in a hush that was not quite silence, but something quieter, like the breath held between arrivals and departures. The air carried a sterile chill, touched by recycled conditioning and the faint metallic tang of aluminum and jet fuel. It was a place suspended in limbo, built to wait, for someone to land, for someone to leave, for someone to return to no one. The echo of flight announcements rose and faded like distant waves, their monotone cadence washing over the glass walls and vacant rows of plastic seats. Occasionally, the low thrum of suitcase wheels rattled across the glossy stone floors, breaking the monotony like brief punctuation marks in a sentence too long to finish. Overhead, the fluorescents flickered once, tired bulbs and tired ceilings, before settling back into their cold glow. The people here moved slowly, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. Jet-lagged figures with slumped shoulders wandered through the terminal, trailing exhaustion behind them like invisible luggage. Some stared blankly at the departure boards, others at their reflections in the long windows overlooking the tarmac, where planes dozed like sleeping giants under a foggy sky. The night shift was a different world. Conversations were hushed, the air grew heavier, and time seemed to lose interest in keeping pace. Procedures became muscle memory. Smiles, if any, were mechanical. It was the hour when even the airport itself looked weary, when hope paused, and everything felt muted. But for Jude Rayner, tonight carried a different weight. He stood with stillness that didn't quite belong to the place, like a figure carved out of something older than weariness. His uniform fit with practiced precision, every crease a story, every patch earned. He wasn't scanning the crowd like the others. He was watching. At Jude's side stood Valor, a towering German shepherd whose silhouette spoke of both strength and solemnity. His fur was a deep sable, a blend of midnight black and burnished copper that rippled like smoke with every shift of muscle. It wasn't the polished coat of a show dog, but the worn armor of a soldier, weathered by dust, rain, and the harsh breath of places no one spoke about. There were scars beneath that fur, small, faint. But they were there, like punctuation marks on a story only he and Jude knew by heart. Valor stood with the stillness of stone, yet his every movement was deliberate, fluid, like a current of silent warning. His frame was broad-chested and powerful, built for endurance and protection, but never clumsy. His paws landed on the floor without a sound, each step placed with the care of a creature that had learned the cost of noise. His tail rested low, calm but alert, mirroring the measured discipline etched into every line of his posture. His eyes were the color of worn amber, intense, steady, unflinching. They didn't simply look at the world. They evaluated it, scanned it, interrogated it. There was no wandering gaze, no idle curiosity, only focus, deep and unnerving, as if he could see more than light allowed, as if he wasn't just watching movement, but motive. His ears were sharp triangles, always erect, twitching minutely at sounds no human could register. A breath caught in a throat 2 terminals away, the click of a safety release, the subtle shift in a voice trying to mask fear. He absorbed it all, not with tension, but with readiness, like a wire strung tight, waiting for the faintest vibration to speak the truth. Valor wasn't merely a service dog. He was memory, forged into muscle and bone. He was instinct, refined through hardship and loyalty, where Jude's own senses faltered, dulled by fatigue, blurred by doubt. Valor stood in the gap. He didn't just guide Jude forward, he grounded him, reminded him of what was real, what was near, what was coming. He was not an extension of Jude. He was the part of Jude that still believed in something worth protecting. And in that quiet, sterile terminal under the watch of tired lights and hollow echoes, the two of them stood like a single unit. Man and dog, shaped by trust, moved by silence, bound by something older than commands. The final shift of the day always invited complacency. Understandably so. Most inspections were winding down, and the remaining arrivals were scattered, mostly international travelers stumbling under the weight of time zones. Jude used to think he could read this terminal like a map. He knew the rhythm of the place, could sense the heaviness of a refugee's suitcase, or spot the hunchback of an aging tourist. But tonight, as he and Valor walked their last loop through the checkpoint zone, the dog stopped. Suddenly, without signal. Jude froze. He didn't speak, didn't ask, didn't command. He simply leaned slightly and looked down. Valor stood completely still, like a stone rooted to the cold floor. Ears high, head slightly lifted, eyes unblinking. He had sensed something. Jude followed Valor's gaze. Far down the concourse, a wave of passengers had just emerged from a flight arriving from Seoul. Their faces were drained, movements sluggish, shoulders heavy from hours of confinement. They drew no special attention until one woman stepped forward, pushing a navy blue stroller. She wore a gray hoodie, the hood half pulled over her head. Her eyes remained cast down, avoiding contact with anyone. Her hands gripped the stroller's handle so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. Inside the stroller, the child was bundled in a blanket, head tilted, eyes closed. Asleep, perhaps. But it wasn't the child that caught Jude's eye. It was the single bead of sweat rolling down the mother's forehead. In an air-conditioned space kept cool and stable, sweat meant something. But that wasn't what made Jude pause. It was how she walked, not fast, not slow, but calculated, as if she were trying to keep her steps even, yet couldn't hide the tension layered into every movement. Valor still didn't move. His body seemed coiled to the woman's heartbeat. Something wasn't right. Jude leaned in and whispered, "What is it, kid?" Valor didn't respond. He didn't need to. His body was speaking clearly, neck pointed, legs frozen, eyes fixed, as if the entire world had narrowed to a single, inescapable orbit. The stroller rolled past, not far from where they stood. Jude caught a glimpse of the name tag. Claire Song. The name rang a bell. He couldn't say why, but it felt familiar. Everything remained within control, but the comfort of routine had disappeared. Jude stepped half a pace forward, his hand resting lightly on Valor's shoulder, a signal to be ready. In the next few seconds, the world seemed to hold its breath. The lights glared, the hallway quieted, the woman kept walking, the stroller glided forward. But Valor no longer waited. The dog launched forward so decisively that Jude barely kept up. Valor lunged, planted his front paws on the stroller's edge, and barked. The first bark rang through the terminal like a thunderclap, breaking silence. It wasn't just a warning. It was the roar of instinct, of training, and of loyalty. The mother screamed. The stroller rocked. The blanket draped over the child slipped to the floor, and then came the glint of metal beneath the lights. A Glock 19, taped to the stroller frame, hidden under the cushion beneath the child's back. Barrel aimed upward, safety off, round chambered. For a single heartbeat, everything held still. Then the chaos exploded. Passengers screamed, guards pulled weapons, people fell, luggage toppled, sirens blared like alarms of something far more dangerous than a gun. Jude stepped between Valor and the crowd. And while every eye turned toward the woman, he looked only at the dog. There was no fear in Valor's eyes, no rage, only one thing remained: certainty. Valor knew from the very beginning, and this time, like so many others, he had been right. Valor hadn't waited for a signal. He never did, but this moment felt different. His leap carried no aggression, no hostility, only pure instinct and conviction. He moved as if some invisible wire had pulled every muscle in his body toward the truth. The stroller trembled as Valor's front paws landed on its edge. A deep, piercing bark shattered the stillness that had cloaked the airport terminal. Loud, sharp, halting the world in a breath. People jolted. Screams rang out. Luggage clattered to the ground. A few passengers stumbled backward. Security guards tightened their grips on holsters, eyes darting in every direction. The woman, Claire, screamed out of reflex, yanking the stroller back. But it was too late. Valor didn't move. He didn't bite, didn't harm the child. He just stood there, barking in steady bursts, as if trying to force the world to look, right there, at the stroller. A strip of fabric slid off little Theo's body in the confusion. And then, everything froze. Beneath the blanket, beneath the child, taped along the side frame of the stroller, was a small, dark object, metal glinting under the light. The barrel pointed straight up. A Glock 19. No one in the room moved for the first few seconds. Only the sharp cry of baby Theo broke the spell, a first wail rising in a symphony of chaos and disbelief. Jude rushed forward and dropped to his knees beside the stroller. He pulled the blanket aside, eyes fixed on the duct tape and the unmistakable shape of the weapon. It wasn't a toy, it wasn't a replica, it was real, and it was loaded. "This is a live weapon!" someone shouted behind him. A security officer with a gun drawn, shouting orders. "Back off!" Jude barked. "Nobody fires! There's a child here!" Valor stood his ground, unmoving, like a stone pillar, his eyes locked on Claire, the mother now clutching her head, backing away step by shaky step, her body trembling as if trying not to collapse. Guards poured in like floodwater. Alarms flashed. A man in uniform screamed into a radio. Others unrolled tape to block off the crowd. People ran. Others filmed. Someone sobbed uncontrollably. An older passenger sank into a chair, hand on chest, gasping for air. And Claire, she still stood, arms out as if shielding the child from the world. But Jude's eyes never left Valor. The dog had stopped barking. Silent now, but still alert. His gaze stayed fixed on the woman, not the child, not the gun, on her. No growl, no threat, just a stillness. And a look Jude had come to understand. There was more here. Something deeper. Claire stood like a ghost in the storm. The alarms kept screaming. Footsteps thundered from all directions. Commands echoed. But around her, everything felt muffled, distorted, like she were underwater. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks pale. Dark circles under her eyes blurred the shape of her pupils. Claire didn't shout, didn't resist, didn't explain. Her arms hovered midair, trembling in place like a figure trapped between panic and paralysis. And when her eyes met Valor's, there was no defense in them anymore. Only hope, or maybe a plea, that someone, even a dog, would see past the label of a threat and recognize the person. An officer approached, handcuffs ready, but Jude raised a hand. "Wait." "For what?" The officer frowned. "You saw it, didn't you? A gun on a baby. That's criminal, no debate." Jude didn't turn around. His gaze stayed on Claire. "I'm not saying we ignore it, just don't rush. You want your dog to investigate for us now?" At that moment, Valor took a single step forward. No pounce, no retreat, just sat in front of Claire, still as stone. Then something no one expected happened. He touched her hand with his muzzle. A gesture so light it felt like wind. But it was enough. The emotional wall Claire had held finally collapsed. She broke down. No sobs, no screams, just tears. Falling, steady and quiet, as if they'd been held back for months, maybe years, with no escape. Her shoulders trembled, her whole body swayed, as if the slightest breeze could bring her to her knees. Jude needed no more evidence. He had seen criminals cry before, but not like this. Not with the kind of pain only a mother who had held her child through fear could carry. He gently reached for her hand. Not to restrain, just to let her know no one meant her harm. "We're going to a private room," he said softly but firmly. "You can tell your story there, if you're ready." Claire didn't say anything. She nodded. It was the quietest nod Jude had ever seen. In a small interrogation room, far from the checkpoint, Claire sat across from Jude. The room was cold, stark white, and bare. Nothing but a metal table, 2 chairs, and a single camera mounted in the corner. She curled into her worn hoodie, hands clenched tightly in her lap as if holding on to something invisible. Outside, Valor sat at the door. No one had ordered him. He just stayed there, as if he knew he was meant to wait. Jude watched Claire for a long while. He didn't turn on the recorder, didn't open a file. He just sat there, like someone who had learned that silence was sometimes the most effective question. Finally, Claire lifted her head. Her voice came out hoarse. "You're the only one who didn't look at me like I'm a monster." Jude didn't respond. "You don't know me. But your dog," he looked at me like I was still human. The silence returned. Then she spoke. Slowly, haltingly, but clearly. Her name was Claire Song. She was from Daegu, South Korea. She had studied in the US, stayed, and worked as a translator for a tech company. She had once been in love, had a family, believed marriage was the safest place to be, but that love turned into fear. Night after night. Her husband, Grant Donovan, had gone from a charming man with accolades and connections to a nightmare with credentials. He controlled everything, my messages, my bank account, my body, Claire said, her eyes avoiding Jude's. And then came Theo. He said the child was his, that I was just the shell. She had tried to leave once. The police said there wasn't enough evidence. She tried again, planned to return to Korea, but her visa was too short. She couldn't stay there long enough. Staying in the US meant risking arrest if her husband accused her of kidnapping. Do you know what that feels like? To be a mother, but have no right to keep your child? Jude said nothing. He understood, not in the literal sense, but he knew. That feeling of choosing between what was legal and what was necessary to survive. The gun, Claire went on. I never meant to use it. But I knew, if he found me, I wouldn't get a second chance, and I couldn't let him take my child away. Jude gave a small nod. Barely noticeable, without judgment. He stood up, walked to the door, and opened it just a crack. Valor looked up. No words were needed. The dog rose, stepped into the room, and quietly settled beside Claire's chair. Not a sound, no bark, no growl, just presence. And it was enough to make Claire's shoulders loosen for the first time in weeks, maybe months. Outside, the airport had returned to normal. Passengers boarded flights. Gate G was swept and cleared. The stroller was taken for inspection. But inside a small room, where a mother still leaned into the quiet company of a dog, something had shifted. Valor, the dog who never barked without reason, had gone silent. Because this time, he knew he didn't need to alert the world. He just needed to listen. The one thing no one else had done. The interrogation room was small and sealed tight, the kind of space where even a breath sounded measured. The pale gray walls weren't just painted. They felt dusted over with the wear of time, dulling the room into a kind of numb, cold void. Fluorescent lights from above cast an unnatural white glow, as if someone had tried to scrub the space of all traces of humanity, leaving only a sterile stage for unflinching truth. The metal table was bolted to the floor, not for aesthetics, but as a symbol. Nothing in this room could be moved without permission. 2 chairs faced each other. No armrests, no back support, nothing to lean on, not even hope. In one corner, a small surveillance camera sat, barely visible, but its gaze was constant, tracking every breath, every blink, a silent, emotionless witness. The cold wasn't from the temperature. It came from the nature of the place. A room where words were weighed like weapons, where silence carried the weight of a courtroom. The woman on the other side of the table, Claire, was the only thing in the room that still held any trace of color. Her shadow stretched across the gray tile like a smear of ink not yet dry, faint but still trying to exist. She didn't move. Her body leaned slightly back in the chair, searching for some fragile anchor amid the storm rising quietly inside her chest. The chair gave a soft creak as she shifted. Too quiet to startle, but loud enough to break the dense silence pressing against the 4 walls. There were no cuffs on her wrists, no guards behind her. But the stillness in her body, the kind that stretched so long it made you forget she was even alive, wasn't calm. It was the stillness of something drained, of someone with no strength left to fight, and no reason to. Jude sat across from her. He didn't rush to open the file, didn't touch the notepad. He looked at Claire, not with the eyes of a detective waiting for a confession, but with the gaze of someone who had seen more pain than necessary in others. There was patience in his expression, but caution too. Valor, like a shadow of loyalty, lay at Jude's feet. No growl, no shift. Only the steady rise and fall of his breathing gave proof that the creature was still there, alive, aware, and waiting. Claire hadn't spoken a word since she was brought in. No, what's going to happen to me? No pleading, no blame. She simply sat, frail, hands resting limply in her lap, fingernails pressing lightly into the fabric of her hoodie, like she was clinging to whatever warmth still lingered in her own skin. Jude didn't need words to see something breaking inside her. Not fast, not loud, but the kind of collapse that happens silently, like a rotting roof during rain. One look at her, and it was clear. This wasn't her first time in a room like this. Not the first time questioned, doubted, inspected, and forced to be silent. "Your name is Claire Song, right?" Jude spoke for the first time, his voice soft. Claire didn't answer, but she nodded, just enough to show she was listening, that she understood, and that she was choosing not to resist. "Would you like some water?" Another slight shake of the head. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Valor. Not with fear, not like before, but with a blankness, no plea, no defense. Just the look of someone who had grown used to being misunderstood. Valor shifted, moving from a curled position to lying flat, his head pointed straight at Claire. Ears alert, eyes open, watching every small movement, not to strike, but as if waiting for some invisible signal from her. Jude noticed it. He had seen Valor react to suspects before, to smugglers, liars, criminals. But this was different. No growl, no tension, just a kind of quiet focus, as if the dog was breathing in time with the woman across from him. No one spoke. No one needed to. The silence said everything. That sometimes what breaks a person isn't the shouting, but the moments when no one listens at all. And that was why Jude remained seated. And why Valor hadn't closed his eyes. Claire slowly moved her hand inside the oversized pocket of her hoodie, each motion hesitant, like searching for something long buried at the bottom of despair. For a moment, Jude thought she wouldn't bring out anything. But then, from her trembling palm, something small appeared. A tiny stuffed bear, barely the size of her hand. Its fabric was worn to mesh. One plastic eye had fallen off. An ear was splitting at the seams, and across its stomach a crude stitch of white thread marked a repair done by hand. It looked like something worthless, forgotten in the luggage of children passing through airports around the world. But Claire didn't toss it on the table. She placed it gently on the cold steel surface, carefully, like it was the only remaining link between her and the reason she was still there. No one said a word. Even Valor didn't react. He only tilted his head slightly, watching her with eyes that somehow seemed to understand. Whatever came next mattered more than any defense ever could. Claire gently turned the little bear in her hands, feeling for the coarse thread across its belly. Slowly, steadily, she began to pick the stitches apart. Patient, unrushed. When the fabric finally parted, there wasn't stuffing inside. There was something small and black. She pulled out a micro SD card, barely larger than a fingernail, and placed it gently next to the bear. The motion, though no one had taught her, carried the weight of a final surrender. As if she no longer had the strength to explain, only the courage to let someone else see it for her. Jude picked up the card. His laptop sat open beside him. No password, no questions. He simply inserted it and opened the first visible folder. A series of video and image files appeared, all labeled by date codes, arranged in a way that felt strangely meticulous, like she'd been preparing for this for a long time. He selected a video. Seconds later, the screen lit up. A kitchen. Dim yellow light. A child's sobbing could be heard faintly in the background. The camera had been hidden, placed at a low angle, grainy. Claire, yes, her, stood hunched by the sink. A man approached, his voice low, bitter. No sound of hitting, but it wasn't needed. The threat in his tone was enough. If you leave this house without permission again, I swear you'll disappear without a trace. Claire didn't answer, but her body recoiled instinctively. Another clip. A hospital. Injury report with typed words. Right wrist trauma. Suspected hairline fracture. Extensive bruising on my lower abdomen. The X-ray needed no comment. Then came an audio file. Claire's voice, soft, broken, responding to someone at a legal aid center. I don't want to press charges. I just want to keep custody. Then another video. Harsher. An argument. Loud crashes. Blurry images, but clear enough to show Claire being shoved against a wall, a child's scream echoing. It ended with Claire sitting on the floor, arms over her head, blood trickling from her lip, while the man walked away calmly, as if finishing a tiring household chore. Jude stopped the video. He couldn't watch more. The room, already cold, thickened with the weight of proof no one could ignore. No need for police, no need for experts. Anyone watching those clips would understand. This wasn't a woman trying to hide a crime. This was someone exhausted from surviving every single day. Claire didn't look at the screen. She sat still, as if the video no longer concerned her. Because it was too familiar, too painful, too real. And when you've lived in hell long enough, sometimes you stop noticing the fire? Jude closed the laptop. His hand tightened slightly. Neither he nor Valor said a word. They didn't have to. In the bright silence, the truth had spoken for itself, and its voice came from a tattered toy bear, carrying the pain of a mother who had run out of places to turn. Claire sat motionless long after the final video ended. She didn't look to Jude, didn't wait for a reaction, didn't hope for comforting words. Maybe she had grown used to being dismissed, questioned, or twisted into something she wasn't. But now, when the room had heard everything without needing words, she knew it was her turn to speak. "I didn't plan to hurt anyone." Her voice was barely more than a breath, just loud enough to exist in the enclosed space. "I never meant to cause harm, especially not in a place like this." Jude didn't interrupt. He stayed still, his eyes on Claire, never pressing. He knew you couldn't demand truth from a mother who had hidden her pain inside a teddy bear, just to protect her child's chance at peace. "I brought the gun," she continued, her voice still low but steadier. "Not for self-defense the way you think. I don't know how to shoot. I've never fired a gun. But I knew he could find me. And if he did, I just needed something to make him hesitate. 1 second. 1 second might be enough for me to grab my son and run." "You don't understand." She looked up for the first time, meeting Jude's eyes. "You don't know what it's like to wake in the middle of the night, not because your baby is crying, but because you dreamed he was standing next to your bed, his hand on your child's ankle. You don't know what it's like to teach your child to call his father by a fake name, just in case we run into someone who might recognize us." Jude remained silent. At his feet, Valor slowly lifted himself. Claire's hands tightened slightly on her lap. "I can't prove I'm a victim. No one believes a Korean woman with broken English, living on temporary status, whose former employer went bankrupt. To the law, I have no roots. And without roots, you have no ground to stand on. He has lawyers, friends in the system, medical records saying I'm unstable, written by the doctor he chose. I once went to the police. They asked, 'Do you have bruises?' I didn't. Because he was smart. He never left marks. It was always word against word, and mine? No one listened." Valor stepped closer. Nothing sudden, just slow, steady movement. He circled behind Jude and walked directly to Claire's side, stopping next to her chair. Claire bowed her head, almost in apology, as if she didn't deserve to be touched by anything living. But Valor didn't wait. He lifted his head gently and placed his muzzle on her knee, not pressing, not demanding, just being there. Claire froze. She didn't sob, didn't collapse like in the movies. She simply trembled, a raw, instinctive response of a wounded creature feeling kindness without judgment. Her hand moved slowly, then rested lightly on Valor's head. For the first time in many days, she touched something not out of defense, but connection. Valor remained still. He didn't nudge, didn't ask for affection. He simply let her know. He was here. She wasn't alone. And Jude knew. No report could describe what was happening before him. A mother, nearly swallowed by the world, being helped by a canine dog to recover the last fragile piece of trust buried deep within her soul. Claire once believed that love was something natural, like breathing. She believed in first glances, in genuine concern, in small, tender gestures. And when she met Grant Donovan, everything she had ever believed in seemed perfectly aligned to welcome that man into her life. Grant entered her world at a company party, surrounded by men in gray suits and women in office dresses. But he stood out not for his looks, but for something deeper, an aura that made others instinctively trust him. The way he shook hands, how he held eye contact when listening, and that smile, polite, measured, just warm enough to let down the walls Claire had spent years building. He worked in private security, protecting those who need to be protected, as he put it. At the time, Claire was just a part-time Korean interpreter working at an American tech firm. She didn't think much of it. To her, Grant was the embodiment of stability, a real name in the blurry world of people like her who lived on visas and uncertainty. Their first conversations were simple. questions about work, a kind word when she coughed, a coffee after work. Then came the promise. I always feel safe when I'm with you. For a woman far from home, alone in a city with no family, those words were enough to make her hand over her heart without asking for credentials. But soon, those sweet words became shackles. Not in any obvious way, more like a bracelet that tightened slowly with time, so subtly that Claire couldn't tell when it had started holding her back. The first time was when Grant told her, "You shouldn't go out with male colleagues. I just don't want anyone to get the wrong idea." She listened, thinking it was care. Next, he said, "You don't need to carry money. I'll take care of everything." Claire felt relieved, until she realized she no longer knew the password to her own bank account. He didn't forbid things. He simply suggested that her old friends couldn't be trusted, that her mother in Korea shouldn't call too often, because you need to focus on building a family here. And when she asked to return to work after maternity leave, Grant said, "No need. I earn enough. It's better if you stay home with the baby." Claire tried to push back. At first, she thought all relationships needed compromise, but each time she resisted, Grant didn't shout. He smiled. A faint, composed smile, then quietly disappeared into his office. No smashing things, no threats. But that night, the internet was disconnected. When she asked, he said, "It's just a network issue. You can wait." Then it was the phone. Suddenly, no signal when she called her mother. Her credit card was declined at the pharmacy. Her identification documents were put away for safekeeping. And she began to understand. Grant didn't need to raise his voice to threaten. He only needed to make her completely dependent. Their apartment slowly turned into a velvet-lined prison. Beautiful, clean, well-equipped, but with no exit. Small cameras appeared in room corners, on bookshelves, even in the smoke detector. When Claire asked, he said, "Just to protect the baby." But on some nights, when she cried quietly in the bedroom, Grant would walk in, without knocking, without hesitation, as if he had already heard it all. Claire once thought she was imagining things, that her fear was irrational. Until one day she left her phone in the kitchen and came back to find Grant scrolling through her messages, openly, without hiding. He wasn't ashamed. "I was just checking to see if anyone was bothering you." She went silent for weeks after that. Because she knew. He didn't need to prove anything. He could call the police and fabricate a story about her having postpartum mental issues. He could take the baby and claim she was unfit to be a mother. And because he had connections, reputation, money, he knew no one would side with an Asian woman on a short-term visa holding a newborn in her arms. That was when Claire started setting alarms for 2 a.m. Not for any reason, just to check if the doors were locked, if the camera lights were blinking red. She began journaling, in Korean, and hid the notebook inside the sofa lining. One day, the notebook vanished. Grant said, "You should sleep more and stop dreaming of things that aren't real." When Claire took Theo to see the pediatrician, Grant insisted on going along. He signed the prescription and paid the bill before she could even reach for her wallet. She once tried to speak privately to the doctor, but Grant waited just outside the door. Sometimes the doctor looked at her, his eyes full of pity, but no one asked. No one said a word. She tried to escape once, just once. She stepped out of the apartment with Theo in her arms, and the phone rang. It was Grant calling from his office 10 miles away. "If you pass airport security, every image will be sent to immigration. And you know what happens to people caught crossing borders with a child and no legal documentation." That time she went back, no one knew, except Valor, still just a name in a training file, who had heard similar stories from another place, from someone else. But this time, it was Valor's eyes that saw Claire, not as a case number in a report, but as a person, suffocating under the grip of a man who never needed fists to bring his victim to her knees. Grant Donovan, the man in a sharp suit, a well-knotted tie, smiling eyes, and honeyed words. But inside, he carried a world cold and dark, where he built a prison without bars, locking a woman inside not with violence, but with trust and isolation. Claire had lived in it, and when the frayed teddy bear concealed a small memory card in its belly, that was when she knew. Either she escaped or she died, not by knife, but by nights of suffocating breath, mornings waking to footsteps just behind her. The decision to leave didn't come in a burst. It was like the slow accumulation of suffocation, until the body instinctively surged to grasp the final breath of oxygen. Claire waited for one of Grant's business trips. He traveled often: contracts, conferences, security lectures. A man living two lives. By day, a consultant invited on television. By night, a psychological tormentor in his own home. When he slammed the door shut, Claire didn't pack luggage. She only held Theo, took a small purse, in which she had hidden her Korean passport and the cash she'd saved over 6 months. Not much, just enough for a plane ticket and a journey of uncertain shape. She went to Seoul, where her mother lived. No prior notice, no explanation. The old woman, upon seeing her daughter holding a child, wept silently. But Claire had no time for a long embrace. She knew Grant would find out. He would use technology, connections, and his familiarity with her behavior to track her down. During 3 weeks in Korea, Claire lived like a shadow. She didn't leave the house during the day. All contact with friends was severed. She deleted social media apps, changed SIM cards, even used a fake name when scheduling an appointment with the consulate. She knew international child custody laws didn't allow one parent to unilaterally take a child out of the country, even if that parent was the mother. And if Grant filed an extradition request, she would have no way to resist. She thought of Canada, where an old friend worked for an organization protecting immigrant women. This friend had once said they could help her apply for humanitarian asylum, but it would require time and absolute caution. Claire knew what that meant. Just one detection, a flight itinerary exposed, a face recognized by airport cameras, and everything would end. And that happened sooner than she expected. At Incheon Airport, on the day she planned to fly to Vancouver, Claire saw a man in a white shirt standing near the passport check counter. He did nothing, didn't approach, didn't touch anyone. But his gaze was the kind of gaze she would never forget, the kind that had observed her every step for months in the California apartment. She changed direction immediately, without revealing panic. She told the staff that Theo had a fever and requested to reschedule the flight. Then she walked straight out of the terminal, hailed a taxi heading in the opposite direction of the city. She didn't sleep that night, nor did she speak to her mother, aside from repeatedly apologizing. In her mind were hundreds of plans, all leading to one conclusion. She had to disappear in a way Grant couldn't predict. Had to go to a place he wouldn't expect. Not Vancouver, not Toronto, not anywhere she'd ever mentioned. She bought another plane ticket under a fake name, destination Seattle, just a temporary stop. The goal was to transfer to a smaller city, where she could quietly apply for protection, raise Theo in the shadows, and live like an invisible person until the law could find her voice. Claire knew Seattle was one of the most security-intensive airports. But that was also the perfect misdirection. Grant wouldn't think she was bold enough to pass through there with a child and mismatched documents. Precisely because he thought she was too weak, he wouldn't expect her to go that far. And on the night she carried Theo through customs, her heart pounding so hard she couldn't hear the boarding announcements, she brought nothing but a cloth bag, the teddy bear hiding the memory card, and a Glock 19 pistol carefully taped under the stroller cushion. No spare magazine, no training. But it was the final symbol of will. If discovered, at least she wouldn't have her child taken without a chance to resist. That Glock wasn't something Claire had to search far for. It was in the second bedroom, where Grant kept a large steel-locked cabinet, inside which were various weapons, from tactical knives, pepper spray, to registered and untraceable handguns. He called it his personal collection, a display of control and sovereignty of a man in his own home. To him, guns weren't just for defense. They were declarations, a way to assert that anyone could be shot if he felt threatened, including Claire. Grant had never held the child for more than 5 minutes. He didn't change diapers, didn't wake up at night when Theo cried, didn't care about the type of formula or vaccination schedule. But he knew exactly where each gun in the house was, how many bullets were loaded, the maximum range. To him, control through the barrel was much easier than through trust. And Claire, throughout her time in that apartment, learned only one thing. When you live with someone who carries the arrogance of power and the fear of losing face, every gun in the house is a reminder that you don't get a second chance to make a mistake. The night Grant went on a business trip, Claire opened the cabinet using the code she'd memorized from a secret glance. She didn't choose the biggest gun, nor the most beautiful. She chose the Glock 19 because it was compact, easy to conceal, and simple enough to use without extensive training. She cleaned it thoroughly, wrapped it in soft cloth, then taped it under the stroller frame, a spot no one would check unless they knew beforehand. "Only there he won't look," she whispered as she applied the final layer of tape. Because Grant would never look there. To him, the stroller was women's territory, a place for the child, a possession he claimed as ownership, but never touched tasks like wiping noses, changing diapers, or lulling to sleep. That very disdain was the final gap Claire could exploit to secure a safe space. Carrying a gun wasn't the right choice, but it was the only choice. In the eyes of the law, she could be charged. In society's view, she might be judged as reckless, dangerous, irresponsible with her child. But no one saw the months she lived in a house without her own key. No one heard the midnight voice messages. No one felt the anticipation of footsteps from someone who once swore, "I'll take the child even if you die." She once tried to believe in the system, once walked into a police station speaking in broken English, eyes heavy with exhaustion, holding a sick child in her arms, and asked for a protection order. But they only asked, "Do you have a medical report confirming abuse? Any photos of injuries? Any witnesses?" When the world doesn't believe you're a victim, you have to become your own protector. No recognition needed. No understanding required. Just one truth remained. Your child must survive. Claire didn't carry the gun to kill Grant. She carried it because if he found her at the airport, if he tore Theo from her arms like he had once threatened, at least she would have a chance, not to shoot, but to buy time. 1 second, 2 seconds, maybe enough for someone to intervene, a passenger, a staff member, a canine dog that just happened to be there at the right moment. She couldn't rely on the law, couldn't wait for a protection order, couldn't wager her child's life on the sympathy of a system that had once overlooked her cries for help. So she carried the Glock 19. Not to win, but if she had to lose, she wanted to lose standing, not bowed, not ripped away from her child like an object. And when the white lights of Seattle Airport cast down, when the voice over the PA echoed through the night, when the Malinois named Valor let out a sharp bark and lunged toward the stroller, she knew her journey had not been in vain. Because for the first time in months, there was a living being who recognized that she wasn't carrying a weapon to hurt anyone. She carried it to survive, and to protect the only thing she had left. A little boy named Theo, still asleep beneath layers of blankets in a stroller that held a gun no one ever thought to look for. Except her, a mother. And this time, no one was going to take that away from her again. The training camp sat on the edge of the Arizona desert, where the heat seared skin and the air was thick with a blend of sweat, red dust, and the tang of rusted metal. The dogs that came here were not brought to be loved. They came to be tested, selected, or dismissed. Not all of them met the standard to become working dogs, and even fewer ever had their names listed on the final roster. Some were too aggressive, some were too timid, shrinking back at the sound of a whistle. But then there were those who didn't fit into any category. Silent, guarded, unreadable, and because of that, they were labeled unfit. Valor was one of them. "The dog nobody wants," the trainer muttered through his teeth, gesturing toward the last kennel in the row, where sunlight never quite reached. "Not aggressive, not scared, just indifferent. He doesn't respond to commands, doesn't seek affection, doesn't need anyone. It's like he made up his mind to stop believing in anything." Jude stepped forward, stopping 2 paces from the bars. In the dim shade, Valor's eyes flickered like dying embers. He didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't even glance at the newcomer. He just lay there with his head resting on his front paws, still as if he already knew no one wanted him. And he didn't need to be wanted. At that time, Jude had just transferred from the military to customs enforcement. He wasn't used to working in an environment where gunfire wasn't part of the day. But there was something in Valor's eyes he recognized. It was the same look he had seen in the mirror every morning when he still wore his uniform. The look of someone who had come home, but hadn't really returned. He didn't speak, didn't call the dog's name, didn't try to approach. He simply sat on the cement floor, far enough not to be invasive, close enough that if Valor chose to move, he could. In his hand was an old tennis ball, frayed and stained with dirt. He didn't toss it hard, just let it roll softly into the center of the kennel. The ball made a single turn and stopped a hand's width from Valor's snout. Valor glanced at it, didn't move, didn't react. But he didn't turn away either. The next day, Jude returned. The ball was still there. On the 3rd day, it had bite marks. He smiled. For the first time when Jude sat down, Valor stepped out of the shadows. Not fast, not showy, no tail wag. He simply walked toward the light, 1 step at a time, and sat down in front of Jude. Calmly, as if they had known each other before, in a trench or on some sunburnt road in another lifetime. The trainer watched the moment, shrugged, shook his head, and walked away. Maybe it's a neurological match. You can try, but don't expect too much. But Jude wasn't hoping. He didn't need a perfect dog. He needed one that knew how to be quiet, how to observe, how to survive, just like he did. Training began with the basics: sound response, hand signals, scent tracking. Valor didn't learn quickly like the others. He didn't wait eagerly for commands or get excited over treats. But he remembered. For a long time. And once he understood, he never made the same mistake twice. In the 4th week of training, while others focused on top candidates, Jude quietly led Valor to a stretch of empty ground behind the barracks. No drills, no orders. He simply threw the tennis ball, the same old one, and waited. Valor watched the ball, then looked at Jude. 1 second, 2, then he ran, for the first time. Not for a reward, not for a command, but because he wanted to. He retrieved the ball, returned it, and sat. "Good boy," Jude whispered. No clapping, no loud praise. He just sat and placed his hand gently on Valor's head. The dog closed his eyes for a moment, as if it had been a long time since a touch meant anything but control or obligation. Their bond wasn't built through official evaluations, but in unnamed moments like that, beneath pale afternoon sun, with desert wind brushing past dry cactus, and in the rhythm of two souls breathing in silence. After leaving the training camp, Jude and Valor were assigned to Seattle International Airport, one of the busiest transit hubs in the Pacific Northwest. Their job was to patrol security, scan baggage, sniff out drugs, explosives, and prohibited items, the things machines might miss and humans often overlook. But Valor didn't operate like other canines. He wasn't a tool. He wasn't just a biological sensor covered in fur and claws. One winter morning during a 6 a.m. shift, Jude and Valor followed their usual patrol route. At the time, Concourse D was undergoing routine technical inspection. A team of maintenance workers passed through the security zone, carrying tools and equipment bags. No one looked suspicious. They wore name tags, uniforms, everything in accordance with protocol. But as they passed, Valor halted. He didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't spring like he would with a confirmed trace. He just froze, as if a strange current of air had brushed past his face. His head tilted slightly, ears perked. His body stiffened into a stance Jude hadn't seen since that first day at the training camp, when Valor had curled up in the far corner of a steel cage. Jude noticed it instantly. "Something's off," he muttered. There was no need to ask. Valor never reacted like that to regular travelers. Food odors or electronics didn't faze him. But one of the maintenance workers, a wiry man with a hurried gait, was giving off something Valor could not ignore. Jude flagged him down and requested to inspect the backpack, citing a routine internal security check. The man initially complied, but as he opened the bag, his eyes began to dart. A small movement, but for Valor, it was enough. He moved half a step forward, nose reaching towards the bottom of the pack. "There's nothing in there," the man said, voice tight. Jude didn't reply. He calmly unzipped the lower pocket beneath the lining and found a small plastic pouch hidden inside a tool case. Inside were multiple substances, opioids, amphetamines, and high-dose prescription painkillers outside the allowed transport list. He wasn't a major criminal, just a courier smuggling contraband under an underground order, but he didn't expect to be exposed by a dog. Not because of the scent, everything had been sealed in aluminum and odor-proof wrapping, but because he broke a sweat walking past Valor. Jude remembered the look in Valor's eyes that day. Not aggressive, not restless, just a gaze that seemed to peel away someone's outer skin and see the body tensed beneath, vibrating with fear. When they returned, Jude sat on a stone bench behind the control room, waiting to fill out his report. Valor lay beside him, resting his head on Jude's leg. "You didn't smell him," Jude whispered. "You sensed his breathing change, the fear he couldn't hide." Some things couldn't be detected by scent, but could still be felt. Cortisol, adrenaline, hormones that surge when the body is under extreme stress, a slight increase in heart rate, a rise in sweat without exertion, pupils dilating even though the lighting stayed the same. Valor didn't sniff out fear. He sensed it, with something no one could ever teach. Jude had once seen Valor stop beside a small boy wandering the terminal with a backpack, looking for his mother. There was nothing suspicious about the child, but his mother was crying in the waiting room, overwhelmed after losing their luggage. Valor had walked up to the boy, brushed against his leg, and looked up, as if to say, "It's okay, someone is here now." No one trained him to do that. There were no rewards for that kind of behavior in any operational manual. Jude had never imagined himself saying this about a dog, but to him, Valor wasn't just a partner. He was the unspoken version of himself, a being that had once survived being abandoned, one that had learned to observe in silence, one that understood the world wasn't always kind, so he had to become someone who could stand tall when kindness was nowhere to be found. "He reads souls," Jude once told a superior during the year-end meeting. "Not with his eyes, with something else I don't know how to name. But when Valor looks at someone, I know I need to stop, look longer, and he's never been wrong." During a special baggage check, a female passenger was flagged due to inconsistent personal details. All her papers were in order. Her luggage showed nothing unusual. The scanner detected nothing. But Valor wouldn't leave. He lay quietly beside her suitcase, still and unmoving. Jude checked again, more thoroughly, and found a double lining hiding forged documents, a second passport, and a map outlining a human trafficking route. The woman didn't panic when confronted. But Valor had already sensed something in her eyes. Not fear of being arrested. Fear of being sent back to the place she had once escaped. Later, it was revealed she had been a victim of trafficking, forced into labor across several countries before finally fleeing. That day, Jude didn't file a standard report. He requested the case be transferred to the Refugee Support Unit instead of criminal prosecution. When asked why he trusted her, Jude replied, "Because Valor did." And that's enough. Some things could only be recognized by those who had once carried deep wounds themselves, and somehow Valor carried that past in every step he took. For Jude, working with Valor wasn't a technical procedure. It was learning how to listen to the world through an unnamed sense. Once, when another officer laughed and joked, "You think your dog's psychic or something?" Jude simply said, "No. I think he's been hurt so deeply that now he sees wounds in others before they even know they're bleeding." That was why Jude wasn't surprised when Claire's entire case, from the gun hidden under the stroller to the shaky footage recorded in her old kitchen, started gaining momentum. It had begun as an internal report forwarded to the special unit. But within 12 hours, an emergency meeting was called with the involvement of a federal prosecutor. She was assigned to cases dealing with cross-border domestic violence. Her name was Elaine Vargas, a woman in her 40s, short hair, soft-spoken but firm. She didn't assert authority. She didn't need to. One glance at the video Claire had submitted, and she knew this wasn't an ordinary domestic dispute. This wasn't one-sided conflict or vague accusations. It was a systematic structure of control, complete with threats, manipulated records, and clear signs of someone using their social position to silence a victim. She called it legalized abuse, something that often happened when the perpetrator also held the power to rewrite the narrative. Vargas ordered a full retrieval of Claire's medical history from the past 3 years. She requested verification of Grant Donovan's firearms licenses. She asked the South Korean consulate to confirm Claire's stay abroad. And most importantly, she demanded every byte of data from the memory card Claire had hidden inside the teddy bear be secured and analyzed. Jude observed the entire process from the outside, as if the slow, skeptical justice system he had long questioned was finally beginning to move with intention. No longer just cold reports, no longer signatures forgotten in a drawer. This time, each step left footprints on a path leading to a truth Claire had once believed no one would bother to find. And then, as often happens in cases like this, one woman spoke up, and others began to listen. Less than a week after the initial findings were submitted, an anonymous email arrived at Vargas's office. It contained a low-quality voice recording, a woman's voice, recounting how Grant had forced her to quit her job, monitored her through hidden cameras, and once threatened that she would lose her child if she ever took him to court. They traced the sender. She was a former colleague of Claire's, once lived in the same apartment complex. Then came a second woman, an employee from the security firm where Grant held shares. A third was an old college flame who had broken up with him because Grant always made me feel like I was being watched even after we ended things. Pieces started falling away from the mask. Every testimony left a crack in the polished shell Grant Donovan had built over the years. No one had ever sued him successfully. No one had taken him to court. But now, when a mother dared to cross borders holding her child with a gun hidden beneath the stroller mattress, the story could no longer stay buried beneath the rug. The investigation was widened. Subpoenas were issued. Grant did not appear. His office was closed with a note that read, "System maintenance." Yet as word began leaking to the press, his network started to unravel. The story of a mother hiding a gun in a stroller to protect her child from a powerful father became a side headline in a local paper, then spread quickly across social media. At the time, Claire was still staying in a temporary private room, under the watch of a civilian security officer and a night nurse. She rarely went outside. Even when she carried Theo to the window to show him the sky, her eyes stayed wary, as if the slightest sound might mean Grant would appear from behind the curtain and snatch her son away before anyone could stop it. Jude visited twice. The first time he didn't enter. He simply stood at a distance and handed over a bag of milk and simple toys. The second time, he brought Valor. Claire didn't speak much. She simply sat down, resting her hand gently on Valor's head as he walked over and placed his muzzle on her leg, just like he had the first time. A familiar gesture. But this time, something changed. Claire cried. Not from fear, but from relief. A few days later, Vargas made the official decision. Claire and Theo would be transferred to a victim support center in San Cugat del Vallès, a discreet, protected space with a full team of therapists and legal counselors to help rebuild their case from the beginning. They were no longer being investigated. They were the key witnesses, and those who needed protection. Before leaving the temporary room, Claire packed everything into a small fabric bag. She didn't own much, just a few changes of clothes, a journal her mother once wrote in, and the old teddy bear. The memory card had already been backed up, but she kept the bear as a reminder that sometimes survival isn't about evidence. It's about remembering the days you made it through. She held Theo and stepped into the vehicle. Valor stood beside Jude, watching her with a calm gaze. For the first time in a long while, Claire boarded a vehicle without looking back. And even though there was still a long road ahead, at least now she knew, she wouldn't be walking it alone. Justice isn't always a perfect scale, but sometimes it starts to shift when someone dares to speak. And this time, the voice came from a mother who carried a gun not to attack, but to protect, and a dog who couldn't speak, but who was the first to understand that the fear was real. The house in San Cugat del Vallès wasn't large. It was built simply, painted white with brown trim, tucked behind a row of old olive trees, with a slanted tiled roof and bougainvillea vines hanging over the balcony. From the outside, it looked like any other home in this quiet Catalonian suburb. Ordinary, almost anonymous. And for people who had just escaped the extraordinary, that ordinariness was the most precious thing of all. Claire stepped through the low wooden gate, Theo asleep in her arms, his head nestled against her shoulder, his tiny fingers clutching her shirt as if holding on to life itself. A social worker opened the door with a smile and asked no questions. She led them into a ground-floor room, already set up with a small crib, a few soft fabric toys, and 2 clean sets of sheets. It wasn't a hotel, and it wasn't a hospital, but it was warm. A place to begin again. That night, for the first time in many months, Claire slept through. No nightmares, no waking up to check the lock 3 times, no holding her breath every time footsteps echoed in the hallway. She slept on her side, hand still wrapped around Theo's palm, as if by instinct, and didn't let go. But she didn't have to stay tense anymore. Her body was finally allowed to believe that no one could find her here. When sunlight slipped through the thin curtain, Claire opened her eyes. It took her a few seconds to recognize where she was. Not because it felt unfamiliar, but because there was no hum of surveillance cameras, No blinking red light in the corner. Just sunlight. Real light. From a morning that wasn't rigged to trap her. In the kitchen, the smell of weak coffee and toasted bread drifted from the counter. A woman with curly hair placed a cup of milk on the table and smiled as Claire stepped in. "New here?" she asked in English with a Spanish accent. Claire nodded. "I'm Lucia, room next door." Lucia didn't ask what had happened. She only pointed to a faint scar on her own wrist and said, "We all carry something." Then she returned to feeding her little girl, who was sitting in a high chair with big dark eyes, curiously watching Claire. Claire sat at the table like someone learning to sit in life again, not to survive, but to exist. Around her were other women. Each carried a different expression, some quiet, some still puffy-eyed from crying through the night, some newly arrived with trembling hands pouring water. But they all had one thing in common. They didn't owe anyone an explanation. No one asked, "What did he do?" No one said, "You have to be strong." Because they had all been strong for so long they had run out of words. Children played in the backyard, chasing soft balls and plastic cars. A brown-haired girl walked up to Theo and held out a knitted giraffe. Theo looked at his mother, then gently took it. Claire nodded. Inside, she exhaled for the first time since the plane had landed in America. The day passed without anything extraordinary, but to Claire, every hour was proof that she still had a chance to live as a human being. She was taken for a medical checkup, met with a therapist for the first time. Someone who didn't ask why, only asked, "Did you sleep last night?" "For the first time in months," Claire said. "I slept without hearing someone open the door." That evening, after the lights were off and Theo was sound asleep in his crib, Claire sat alone on the porch. The air was cool, but not cold. Crickets chirped in the background, and a warm yellow glow shone from a house in the distance. She opened the journal her mother once kept. The old pages faded at the corners, and for the first time added a new line. "This is the first time I don't feel watched." There was no clearer way to speak of resurrection, not with grand declarations, just a quiet realization, thin as morning mist. But for someone who had lived in the shadows, it was a light that needed no explanation. The next morning, as Claire was folding the blankets, a soft knock came at the door. She picked up Theo and stepped out. On the porch, under the gentle Mediterranean sunlight, a tall man was standing, and beside him, a familiar figure that made her heart pause. Valor. The dog stood upright, ears alert, eyes calm as he looked at her. No bark, no sudden movement, just his steady presence, like in that interrogation room months ago. Claire opened the door. Theo blinked. In a moment of recognition, the boy turned and murmured with a soft excitement, "Wow." Valor stepped forward. No lunging, no jumping. He simply moved ahead, lifting his head, allowing Theo, still in his mother's arms, to reach out and touch the soft fur between his eyes. Claire looked at her son, then at Jude, the man standing quietly behind, still holding the bag he had brought. "How are you both doing?" he asked, voice low and steady. She nodded. "Better than I thought I could be." They didn't speak about court hearings, or the investigation reports, or what was coming at the federal trial. In this sun-dappled courtyard, there were no accusations, no victims, just a woman who once fled, a man who once endured, and a dog who once saw pain where others looked away. Jude reached into his bag and pulled out a small gift, a brand-new tennis ball, still holding the scent of fresh rubber. He placed it on the porch. Valor looked at it, then at Jude, as if confirming permission. Then he picked it up gently, turned toward Theo, and dropped it beside the boy's feet. A simple act, as if to say, "I missed you." Claire laughed. For the first time, it wasn't a stifled laugh. Not restrained, not rushed. She set Theo down on the ground, letting him crawl toward the ball. Valor stepped back half a pace, patient. And when Theo touched the ball and gave it a soft push, the dog nudged it back with his nose, as gently as if playing with a fragile bird. "He really remembers him," Claire said, eyes fixed on the two in front of her. "So do we," Jude replied. "And you?" She stayed quiet, then nodded slowly, a nod that came from a place deep inside, a place she wasn't sure she still had access to. They spent the entire morning in the yard. Claire told Jude about her first nights there, about how Theo slept soundly now without startling, about the other women she was beginning to know by name, by story, and by the shared knowledge that she was no longer alone. Jude didn't interrupt. He just listened, sometimes smiling, sometimes glancing at Valor as if reading something in the dog's rarely changing expressions. "He still lies in front of the door every night," Jude said. "No orders. No command, but every night, at the same time." "He's still standing guard," Claire whispered, "even now that I'm safe." Jude said nothing. He simply looked at her, the woman who no longer feared the light. And Valor, as if he understood every word, stepped closer to Claire, sat down beside her feet, tilting his head slightly, eyes quiet and clear. No touch was needed. No expression. But it was obvious. This was where he belonged. And this was someone he had chosen never to turn away from. A few weeks after that visit, Claire walked into the courtroom wearing a simple pale gray dress, holding Theo by the hand. The 3-year-old could now say, "Mama," clearly, and waved to everyone with the wide-eyed curiosity of a child who didn't yet understand that this brightly lit room was where his mother's life would be decided once again. At the judge's bench sat an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She read through the charges and case files with an even tone. Among them, the federal prosecutor's petition stated plainly, Claire Song was not the defendant. She was a survivor of a long pattern of coercive control, manipulation, and psychological abuse orchestrated by Grant Donovan. Grant was present in the courtroom. He wore a dark suit and walked with the familiar air of someone used to being heard and believed. But this time, he did not stand in the center of the room as a figure of authority. He sat behind the wooden barrier, between 2 attorneys and 3 security officers. His hands no longer held a phone or microphone or Bluetooth headset like before. They clutched his knees, trembling as a list of testimonies from 12 other women was read aloud. Claire didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Everything she needed to say had already been written, in hospital records, shaky video footage, her mother's testimony, and the journal pages once hidden under the sofa cushion. But most of all, in Theo's eyes, a boy who no longer cried every night, no longer flinched when a man approached, and now sat peacefully coloring in a book on his mother's lap. The judge placed her hand on the bench. Her voice was steady. Considering the evidence, the testimonies, and the full course of this case, the court hereby revokes all custody and guardianship rights of Mr. Grant Donovan. He will be criminally charged with psychological abuse, threats to life, unlawful restriction of personal freedom, and obstruction of justice. No one spoke in the room. Claire only held Theo's hand a little tighter. The boy looked up, smiled at his mother, and to her that smile was the clearest verdict of all. But justice that day did not end with the verdict. Prosecutor Vargas, the woman who had once held the initial case file with skeptical eyes, now stood, walked over to Claire, and handed her a thin document, an official clearance of all charges, signed and sealed by the court. "No one has the right to call you a criminal," Vargas said softly. just loud enough for the two of them to hear. Because you didn't commit a crime. You survived. Claire didn't reply. She only bowed her head. Not out of fear this time, but gratitude. The hearing was over. Reporters stepped back. Grant was taken away. Claire and Theo returned to San Cugat that afternoon, beneath the quiet golden light stretching down the narrow streets. That evening, after Theo had fallen asleep, Claire sat at the small wooden table by the window. She pulled out a blank sheet of paper, a blue ink pen, and began to write. Dear Jude, Rayner, and Valor, I'm not sure if writing a letter is the right way to say this. But as you once said, some things don't need to be said out loud. They just need to be written at the right moment. Thank you for believing me when no one else did. Thank you for standing still when the world was shouting. And thank you for letting a dog who wouldn't follow commands be heard. Long before I could find my own voice again, I used to think I had to stay silent to protect my child. But you both taught me that silence doesn't always save anyone, and that sometimes a bark at the right time can save an entire life. I don't know what the future holds, but today, I've started to sleep without waking in fear, and Theo can smile without needing to look over his shoulder. If one day you pass through San Cugat, please come visit. I bake a decent loaf of bread, and I have my mother's old soup recipe. Valor can rest anywhere in the yard, and Theo now knows how to throw the ball back. I won't say I'm back to being normal, but I am learning how to live, and this time, I am no longer someone who runs. With respect, Claire Song. She folded the letter, placed it into an envelope, and handed it to the staff at the shelter to mail the next morning. Jude read it a week later, after returning to headquarters. He didn't say a word. But as he held the letter, Valor approached and gently nudged his muzzle against Jude's hand, as if he too had heard the words, carried on some distant breeze, through the scent of ink on paper, or perhaps through something simpler, the sense that everything had finally found its rightful place. And maybe the one thing justice can never put into writing is trust. The kind of trust that says, sometimes, someone who hasn't been believed by anyone just needs a single look from a creature that never speaks to step out of the dark and begin to live again. We often speak of dogs as loyal companions, but with shepherd dogs like Valor, it's more than loyalty. It's instinct, a quiet resolve, the ability to see wounds that human eyes cannot. Valor didn't need to speak, didn't need to judge, didn't need to explain. He simply stayed, observed, listened, and touched a heart at the moment it most needed to believe it was still worthy of love. In a world where pain is often hidden behind the mask of normalcy, dogs like Valor don't seek glory. They don't ask for recognition. They simply exist, quietly, patiently, as a reminder that some of the most beautiful things don't require words. Just an eye that knows when to pause, a touch that is warm enough, and a presence that arrives just in time to save a soul worn thin by silence. And perhaps the most precious gift a shepherd can bring is not duty, not skill, but trust, the kind that, once placed in the right hands, can save an entire life.